There is a man in the Bible who shows up out of nowhere, blesses Abraham, and then vanishes. The text says he has no father, no mother, no beginning, no end. And yet, the New Testament claims that Jesus Christ is a priest specifically in this man's order. I'll be honest with you, I just got into this recently. I was looking for a video idea, I saw his name trending, and it just hit me. Who actually is this guy? So I started digging, and the deeper I got, the more I realized that once you see what the text is actually implying, you can't help but ask the same question. Was Melchizedek just an ancient human king, or did Abraham actually meet Jesus face to face? If you grew up in church, you already know the basic rule of the Old Testament. The priests come from the tribe of Levi, and the kings come from the tribe of Judah. You cannot mix them, and if you try, you usually wind up dead. But long before any of those tribes even existed, Abraham fought a massive regional war to rescue his nephew Lot. And when the dust finally settled in Genesis 14, a shadow steps onto the page. Melchizedek, the king of Salem, brings out bread and wine. He doesn't offer a bloody animal sacrifice like everyone else. He simply blesses Abraham in the name of God the Most High, and Abraham, the patriarch of the entire Israelite nation, bows down and pays him tithe. To understand why this is so jarring, you really have to look at the ground they're standing on. Salem is just the ancient Canaanite word for the city that eventually became Jerusalem. And the name Melchizedek isn't just a random label. In Hebrew, Melchizedek means my king is righteous. But in the ancient Canaanite world, Tzedek was actually the name of a recognized local deity associated with justice. So when Melchizedek walks out to meet Abraham, he isn't an Israelite. He's a Jebusite king operating right inside a Canaanite religious system. He calls his God El Elyon, God Most High. In the Canaanite pantheon, El was the supreme creator deity. Abraham looks at this foreign priest king, accepts his blessing, and does something honestly brilliant. He replies by swearing an oath to Yahweh, El Elyon. Do you see what he just did? Abraham takes the supreme title of the Canaanite god and bolts the name of Yahweh straight onto it. He's saying, yes, the Most High God exists, and his actual name is Yahweh. By doing this, Abraham legitimizes Jerusalem as a holy site centuries before David ever conquers it. But that raises an even harder question. After Genesis 14, Melchizedek completely disappears from the Bible for 1,000 years. Not a single mention during the Exodus, the Judges, the early Kings, until King David writes Psalm 110. David is sitting on the throne in Jerusalem, and he writes this prophetic oracle about a future ruler. He says, this ruler will be a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. In the ancient world, this was a massive, scandalous claim. The law of Moses strictly separates kings and priests. It was a firewall built into the constitution of ancient Israel, and King Uzziah literally got struck with leprosy for trying to breach it. But David is claiming a jurisdictional loophole. Imagine a modern president using a centuries-old forgotten treaty to totally bypass Congress. Because David now rules from Jerusalem, he claims the ancient pre-Levitical priestly authority of the city's original founder. He's saying that there's an older, superior priesthood that genuinely does not care what your genetics are. But if you think Melchizedek was just a political tool for David, you need to see what happened next. Fast forward to the time of Jesus, right before the birth of the early church. A group of Jewish scribes living in the desert at Qumran wrote a document that we now call the Dead Sea Scrolls, specifically a fragment known as 11Q13. If you watched my earlier video on the Divine Council, I talked about Psalm 82. That's the text where God judges lesser gods who corrupted the world. I have to be honest with you. I left something out of that video because it was just too massive to explain at the time. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Jewish writers explicitly name who that judging God is. They don't say it's Yahweh. They say the being standing in the heavenly council, judging the corrupt gods and commanding armies of heaven, is Melchizedek. They stripped him of his earthly history and turned him into an immortal, archangelic commander, a divine viceroy who shares the exact same prerogatives of the supreme God. This proves that long before Christianity even existed, Jewish thinkers were already expecting a heavenly mediator, someone who existed before time and would arrive to cancel the cosmic depth of human sin. That is exactly the cultural atmosphere Jesus walked into, and it's exactly the framework the writers of the New Testament used to explain him. This is the part that usually makes people uncomfortable. So before we look at how the New Testament drops the hammer on this mystery, I want to ask you a quick favor. If this channel is helping you read your Bible with fresh eyes, hit subscribe so we can keep untangling these texts together. Because the way the book of Hebrews handles Melchizedek is going to completely alter how you read the New Testament. The author of Hebrews builds an entire theological argument around this one shadowy figure. He points out that Melchizedek has no recorded genealogy, no father, no mother, no birth, and no death. In a book like Genesis, which is absolutely obsessed with family trees, that omission is deafening, so the question splits the room down the middle. Was Melchizedek a Christophany, a literal physical appearance of pre-incarnate Jesus? The evidence for it is honestly incredibly strong. He holds dual office of king and priest, which only Jesus does. He brings bread and wine, perfectly foreshadowing the Last Supper. His name means King of Righteous, a title which no fallen human can legitimately claim. But there is a counter-argument that you have to reckon with. Hebrews 7 says Melchizedek was made like unto the Son of God. The logic here works like a shadow and the object casting it. The shadow is shaped exactly like the object, but it isn't the actual object. If he was actually Jesus, it makes no sense to say that Jesus was made like Jesus. The alternative is that he was a real historical Canaanite king whose life was perfectly orchestrated by God to serve a prophetic blueprint. But there was one group of people who absolutely hated both of these Christian explanations, the Orthodox Rabbis. Because if Melchizedek's priesthood was superior to Aaron's, then the entire Jewish temple system was suddenly obsolete. Hebrews explicitly argues that because the patriarch Levi was still in Abraham's bloodline when Abraham paid the tithe, the Levitical priesthood basically submitted to Melchizedek. To stop this argument, the ancient rabbis engineered a brilliant defense. In the Talmud, they claim Melchizedek wasn't a mystery at all. They say he was Shem, the righteous son of Noah. Since Shem outlived Abraham by 35 years, he was the logical choice for the high priest of humanity. But the rabbis claim Shem made a critical mistake in Genesis 14. He blessed Abraham before he blessed God, and because he inverted the hierarchy, God stripped the eternal priesthood from Shem and handed it to Abraham's descendants. It was a masterful way to protect the Torah from the Christian claim. The priesthood had to change because the human condition required something better than animal blood and genetic exclusivity. It required a priest whose authority came from an indestructible life. Melchizedek wasn't just a piece of an obscure biblical trivia. He was the ultimate proof that God's plan for rescue was never restricted to one tribe, one nation, or one temple. Whether he was a manifestation of Christ or a historical shadow pointing to him. The message hits exactly the same. The King of Righteousness stepped into the human timeline to offer peace, and the only proper response is exactly what Abraham did: submission. If this video helped piece the story together for you, like it so that other people can find it. Comment below on whether you think he was human or pre-incarnate Jesus, and consider supporting the research on Patreon and buy me a coffee. Thank you for watching.